Do you believe that giving too much of yourself is a sign of love? Carl Jung would say that, in fact, it's a silent plea for recognition. Most people confuse generosity with self-abandonment, and the more they try to heal others, the more they distance themselves from themselves. The truth is that no one heals while continuing to put themselves last. Because the love you give when it's born from exhaustion isn't love, it's survival. And that's exactly what the world doesn't want you to realize. We live in a society that applauds sacrifice and calls the simple act of self-care selfishness. But Jung saw the opposite. Emotional healing begins the moment you choose to prioritize yourself, not out of vanity, but out of awareness. Have you ever noticed how whenever you try to please everyone, you end up empty? How the weight of expectations tires you, even when no one is demanding anything from you? This isn't weakness. It's a sign that your soul is asking for space. The body gets sick when emotions are ignored. The mind becomes exhausted when the heart is left for last. And that's why the first act of true love is looking inward, not outward. Jung said that the unconscious always tries to heal you, but it can only do so when you stop sabotaging yourself. The problem is that we've learned to call guilt responsibility and exhaustion virtue. Today's video is an invitation to turn that key. Let's understand together why prioritizing yourself isn't about withdrawing from the world, it's about finally coming home. And when you do that, you'll discover something no one has told you. The love you give to others will never be more powerful than the love you give to yourself. There comes a point when the noise of the world begins to tire. External voices, hasty advice, accumulating expectations, everything sounds repetitive, soulless. And it is in that almost imperceptible instant that a silent force within us begins to call. Carl Jung said that the first step to true spirituality is not to follow a doctrine, but to listen to this inner whisper. It's as if something in the deepest part of the soul is asking for a return to the origin, to the authenticity forgotten beneath layers of obligations and social masks. This call is not a shout, it's a constant murmur that grows each time you try to silence it with distractions. When you allow yourself to listen, something changes. Your gaze deepens, time slows down, and life begins to reveal a new dimension, one where the invisible governs the visible. This is the beginning of the journey of individuation, the point where the ego for the first time bows before the mystery that dwells within it. But the call of the invisible doesn't arrive at convenient times. It appears in the midst of routine, in the weariness of Mondays, in the loneliness disguised as independence. It's the weight in the chest that has no medical explanation, the feeling of being surrounded by people and yet feeling distant. Most try to silence this feeling with work, with distractions, with superficial relationships. But ironically, it is in this discomfort that the soul begins to manifest itself. Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't send signals to torture us. It sends them to heal us. The problem is that we have been trained to seek outside what can only be found within. If you feel lost, perhaps you are not in a dead end, but before the door that leads back to yourself. This is the most challenging and liberating invitation of spirituality, to stop running from the void and have the courage to look it in the eye. Responding to this calling is an act of courage and also of self-love, because listening to yourself requires breaking through the noise of others' approval. It's allowing yourself the discomfort of silence, confronting your own shadow, surrendering to the uncertainty of the unknown. No profound transformation begins with guarantees. It begins with surrender. It is when you decide to listen to your intuition, even without proof, that life begins to conspire in favor of your authenticity. Try small actions. Walk without headphones, meditate for 5 minutes, write what you feel without censorship, and observe what emerges from the silence. The calling is not something you seek, it's something you recognize. And when you recognize it, something inside you whispers, "Now is the time." That's how the invisible begins to take shape. And what was once confusion transforms into direction. There's a type of tiredness that sleep doesn't cure, a silent exhaustion that appears even when everything seems fine. It's the soul trying to warn that something is out of place. And Carl Jung said that suffering is not a mistake of life, but a call to consciousness. And this emptiness that many feel, this sensation of being surrounded by people and yet alone, is the clearest symptom that we have distanced ourselves from ourselves. We live in a world that idolizes productivity and devalues silence. A world that teaches us to run in circles, believing that the next goal will fill the hole we left by ignoring our spirituality. But emptiness is not an enemy, it's a mirror. It appears when external voices drown out the inner voice, when the ego takes the place of the self and desperately tries to sustain the illusion of control. Jung used to say that modern human beings suffer from soul loss, not in a religious sense, but a psychological one, the loss of connection with one's own essence. This disconnection manifests itself in many ways, in constant anxiety, in the need for approval, in the rush to fill every minute of the day so as not to have to deal with one's own silence. It's curious. The more we try to escape the void, the more it grows. And it grows because it doesn't want to be avoided, it wants to be understood. Healing begins when you stop treating the void as an enemy and welcome it as a teacher. Try sitting in silence, without your cell phone, without music, just observing your thoughts. At first it will be uncomfortable. Your mind will scream, demand distraction, but it is precisely in this discomfort that the unconscious begins to reveal itself. The void is not punishing you, it is trying to teach you to listen again. Disconnection is a state of spiritual dormancy, and the first step to awakening is accepting that pain has a purpose. When you understand this, something changes in your relationship with suffering. It ceases to be punishment and becomes a tool. It's the same principle Jung applied to his patients, looking at the symptom not as a disease, but as a message. If you feel loneliness, perhaps it's an invitation to cultivate intimacy with yourself. If you feel apathy, perhaps it's your soul asking for purpose. If you feel fear, perhaps it's your ego resisting change. Each time you listen to what the void tries to say, a lost piece of your authenticity returns, and that's where the individuation process begins to happen, not as a beautiful idea, but as a living experience. It is in this space between discomfort and listening that the invisible begins to speak louder, preparing the ground for the next step, the encounter with the shadow. When Jung spoke about the shadow, he wasn't referring to something evil, but to something human. The shadow is everything we deny in ourselves: fears, guilt, repressed desires, emotions we deem inappropriate. It's the mirror that reflects what the ego tries to hide. And paradoxically, it's also the key to our healing. Most people spend their lives trying to appear good, strong, or controlled, while hiding pain behind smiles and distractions. But what is repressed doesn't disappear. It only disguises itself. Anger becomes irony. Sadness becomes sarcasm. Insecurity becomes arrogance. Jung said that what doesn't become conscious manifests as destiny. In other words, what you avoid facing within yourself, you will end up finding outside, in people and situations that activate the same wounds. That's why certain patterns repeat themselves, not by bad luck, but by a need for awareness. Facing the shadow is an act of brutal honesty. It's admitting that behind the desire to be loved lies a fear of rejection, that behind perfectionism lies insecurity, that behind anger lies pain. This realization hurts, but it liberates, because only what is seen can be transformed. Carl Jung saw working with the shadow as the foundation of individuation, the process of becoming whole. integrating light and darkness. This doesn't mean surrendering to chaos, but understanding why it exists. When anger arises, ask, what is it trying to show me? When you feel envy, question, what does this person awaken in me that I haven't yet recognized? Each emotion is a messenger in disguise. Rejecting it is losing the message. Listening to it is becoming wise. Self-knowledge in this sense is not a journey of perfection, but of reconciliation. A good exercise is to dialogue with your own shadow. Write a letter to it as if it were a real person. Ask it what it wants, what it fears, what it needs. You may be surprised by the answers. This simple practice allows the unconscious to speak, and it always speaks, even when we try to ignore it. It is also useful to observe the automatic reactions of daily life. That comment that irritates you, that type of person that bothers you, that behavior you criticize in others. All of this is a mirror. Jung believed that what we reject most in others is often what we most need to integrate in ourselves. The ego hates this idea because it prefers to blame the world rather than take responsibility. But it is by accepting this truth that the shadow becomes an ally. And when it becomes an ally, you cease to be a slave to your own reactions and become the author of your own story. And it is precisely this inner reconciliation that opens space for the next step, the sacred act of prioritizing yourself. There's a dangerous idea that society has taught us, that putting others first is always an act of virtue. We grow up believing that true love means self-sacrifice, that being good means saying yes, even when your heart screams no. But Carl Jung saw it differently. For him, self-love is not selfishness, it's balance. Loving oneself is the starting point for any form of healthy love. When a person abandons themselves for the sake of another, they are not being kind, they are being unconscious. Because those who do not respect themselves do not teach the world to respect them. And it is in this silent self-abandonment that many wounds begin: burnout, unbalanced relationships, emotional emptiness. Prioritizing oneself, therefore, is a spiritual act. It is saying, I also deserve the care I give. It is the beginning of the healing that Jung called reconciliation with the self, the inner center of authenticity and wisdom. But prioritizing yourself isn't something you do once. It's a daily practice, and often a solitary one. It means learning to choose silence over approval, pause over haste, truth over appearances. And this requires courage, because the world doesn't always understand those who choose to put themselves first. Many will call it coldness, selfishness, or indifference, when in reality it's simply lucidity. Prioritizing yourself is about taking care of your own energy, because without it nothing flourishes. Try small actions. Say no to something that consumes you, even if it seems small. Turn off your cell phone during lunch. Take a walk without a purpose, just to listen to your own thoughts. These simple actions are reminders that you are present. Jung said that only when we allow ourselves to be authentic can we find emotional balance. It is at this point that spirituality becomes practical, no longer as a concept, but as a way of life. Prioritizing yourself is also an invitation to authenticity, because when you start listening to yourself, you discover how much you were playing roles to fit into the world. And little by little, you realize that loving yourself is also about liberating yourself. It's about stopping trying to be what others expect and starting to be who you are. It's about reconnecting with your purpose, not the grandiose purpose that fits into motivational speeches, but the silent one that makes your heart vibrate. It can be as simple as cooking, painting, writing, or taking care of plants. Anything that gives you back the feeling of being whole. Prioritizing yourself is remembering that life is not a race, but a dance. And dancing is only possible when there is an inner rhythm. When you prioritize yourself, everything is reorganized: relationships, decisions, even destiny. It's as if the soul says thank you, And at that moment something changes. But for the new to flourish, it is necessary to clear the ground. And that's where the real inner work begins. Detachment. Imagine your life is a garden. Some parts flourish, others seem dry, and there are places where weeds have grown without you noticing. Carl Jung said that the psyche is like this garden, fertile, alive, but easily suffocated when we let emotions and ties from the past dominate the soil of the soul. Detachment is the act of pulling out these weeds, not out of coldness, but out of love. It is the decision to no longer carry what has already served its purpose. Most people confuse attachment with loyalty, as if letting go were betrayal, but often holding on to what hurts is the true abandonment of oneself. Detachment is, above all, an exercise in self-love and spirituality. It is trusting that what goes away makes room for what needs to arrive. Jung saw this movement as essential for individuation. The ego that relinquishes control gives space for the self, the center of the soul, to guide the process. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or denying what happened. It means learning from what was and letting the experience transform into wisdom. It's like autumn, which doesn't lament the falling leaves because it knows the soil needs them to bloom in spring. But the ego fears emptiness. It clings to people, memories, and identities because it's afraid of the silence that follows. The problem is that by holding on to what no longer belongs to us, we block the new from happening. How many times do we maintain relationships that drain our energy for fear of loneliness? How many times do we insist on old dreams simply because giving up seems like failure? Letting go is not loss, it's liberation. Jung believed that every time we let go of something, we recover a part of ourselves, because the energy that once sustained the past begins to nourish the present. Practicing detachment is both a spiritual and practical act. It can begin with simple gestures, making space in your closet, deleting old conversations, clearing your environment of memories that no longer reflect who you are. It's not about throwing things away, but about giving meaning to what remains. Perform a symbolic ritual. Write down what you want to let go of and burn the paper intentionally. This communicates to the unconscious that you are ready to start over. Carl Jung said that the soul renews itself when consciousness decides to cooperate with the unconscious, and detachment is this cooperation in action. When you let go of what weighs you down, the mind clears, the body breathes, and intuition speaks again. And in this fertile silence, something new begins to germinate, the understanding that everything that is true is never lost. It only changes form. And it is precisely in this space of listening that the next stage of the journey emerges, understanding the subtle language of the unconscious. There is a language that doesn't use words, and yet it speaks all the time. Carl Jung called this language the voice of the unconscious. It manifests itself in symbols, coincidences, dreams, and sensations that at first glance seem random. But nothing is random in the realm of the soul. When you feel a shiver upon meeting someone, when you dream of something that repeats itself, when a phrase or song seems to answer an inner question, the unconscious is trying to communicate. The problem is that we have been educated to listen to the noise, not the silence. We have learned to trust logic, but we have forgotten intuition. And intuition, according to Jung, is the subtle language of spirituality, the way the self guides the ego toward what is true. This language cannot be deciphered in haste. It is understood with presence. It is necessary to learn to listen to the invisible, and this requires a courage that few possess, the courage to slow down and feel. Often the unconscious tries to alert us to something that reason refuses to see. A disturbing dream can be a warning that we are drifting away from ourselves. A repetition of events can reveal an emotional pattern that has not yet healed. Jung said that the soul always knows what to do to heal itself. The challenge is to silence the mind. Listening to this inner wisdom is a training in authenticity. It begins with small actions, writing down dreams upon waking, reflecting on the coincidences of the day, noticing how the body reacts to certain people or decisions. The unconscious speaks through sensations, the knot in the stomach, the coldness in the hands, the expansion of the chest. All of these are messages. The more you ignore them, the louder they speak, until life with its relentless pedagogy forces you to listen. Healing in this sense is a process of symbolic literacy, learning the language of one's own soul again. To make this listening clearer, create simple rituals. Set aside a few minutes each day for silence. No screens, no stimuli, and simply observe what emerges. Meditate, write, walk in contact with nature. The unconscious loves symbolic movement. It speaks through gestures that consciousness understands later. Jung saw the dialogue between the conscious and unconscious as a creative partnership, the basis of the individuation process. Each insight, each intuition, each synchronicity is a reminder that you are not separate from the whole. True spirituality, according to Jung, is not about escaping the world, but about listening to it deeply. Because the outer universe is a mirror of the inner universe. When you begin to perceive the messages that have always been around you, life ceases to seem random and begins to have purpose. And it is at this point that something very subtle happens. The voice of the inner critic begins to silence, and the voice of the soul begins to become audible. Within each person lives a voice that judges, compares, and diminishes. Carl Jung called this presence the autonomous complex. Psychic fragments formed from criticism, rejection, and painful experiences. This inner critic is like an echo of the past, repeating the words that once hurt. You're not enough. You'll fail again. You shouldn't feel this way. It disguises itself as conscience, but its true nourishment is fear. And it's curious. The more we try to be perfect, the stronger it becomes. This happens because the critic doesn't seek its own evolution, it seeks its control. Jung said that the psyche fragments when we live trying to please this voice instead of listening to the soul. And that's why many people, even successful ones, feel a void. They conquer the world but remain at war with themselves. Healing begins when you recognize that this voice is not yours. It's learned, inherited, conditioned. The soul, on the other hand, speaks in a different tone. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't demand, it invites. While the critic says you should, the soul says you could. This difference changes everything. The critic pushes you towards the fear of punishment. The soul invites you to the courage of expansion. Listening to the soul is a training in self-love and authenticity. It's giving more space to intuition than to comparison. It's allowing yourself to make mistakes and still embrace yourself. When you treat yourself with kindness, the unconscious understands the message, I am ready to integrate. And this integration is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, uniting the human and the divine that coexist within us. A good exercise is to observe your thoughts for an entire day and note how many times you criticize yourself. Then ask yourself, would I speak like this to someone I love? This simple reflection can be transformative. Replacing the critic with the voice of the soul is not denying self-criticism, it's purifying it. The soul doesn't want to spare you from error, it wants to free you from guilt. When you begin to listen to yourself with compassion, something extraordinary happens. Fear loses its power, the body relaxes, the gaze changes, the world seems less threatening. You begin to make decisions with more clarity and less anxiety because you no longer need to prove anything. Spirituality at this level ceases to be an escape and becomes a form of presence. The voice of the soul is serene, yet firm. It guides you with the gentleness of one who trusts. When you learn to follow it, life reorganizes itself around a new center, the self. And it is precisely this inner centrality that prepares us for the next phase of the journey, the deepest and most challenging crossing, that of individuation. Most people believe that maturing is about accumulating experiences, when in reality, maturing is about integration. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path by which a human being becomes who they truly are. But no one reaches this point without first getting lost. The journey begins when the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted, begins to crack. It's the moment when what once made sense suddenly no longer does. You look at your career, your relationships, your old dreams, and feel that none of it fully represents you. This is the breaking point, the place where the ego encounters the limit of its certainties. And that's where the true spiritual work begins. Jung said that individuation is the most dangerous path because it requires courage to face the abyss between who you are and who you pretend to be. But it is also the most liberating because on the other side of this abyss lies the self, the center of authenticity. The journey is not linear. It's made of comings and goings, of days when everything seems to fit together and others when nothing makes sense. Sometimes the unconscious pushes you into situations that seem like setbacks, but are actually invitations to revisit what hasn't yet healed. Jung believed that suffering is the purest form of transformation, not because pain is necessary, but because it reveals what is still dormant. Every crisis, every disappointment, every loss contains a symbolic message. The person who rejected you, the job that ended, the plan that failed, all of this can be the scenario that the unconscious uses to bring you closer to your true center. That's why resisting pain is the same as resisting growth. The journey demands surrender, letting life dismantle you, knowing that what is real will remain. It's a process of inner death and rebirth, where each false part falls away so that the essence can emerge. But no one travels this path completely alone. Jung reminded us that individuation, while personal, is also universal. We all face the shadow, fear, desire, and chaos at some point in the journey. And yet there is something profoundly human in this, knowing that suffering makes us equal and the search unites us. Spirituality here becomes a silent companion, an assurance that there is a greater purpose sustaining the process. Practices such as meditating, writing about what you feel, or spending time in contact with nature help strengthen this connection with the self. They are anchors in the midst of the crossing. And when you begin to perceive yourself changing, not by imposition but by maturation, it is a sign that something within you has awakened. This is the Jungian crossing, the moment when the being, recognizing itself as fragmented, begins to become whole. And it is in this integration that the next stage is born, the return to authenticity. There comes a point in the journey where trying to please the world becomes more painful than disappointing it. Carl Jung said that authenticity is the natural state of the soul, but also the most feared by the ego. To be authentic is to stop editing your own essence to fit into other people's molds. It's letting go of the masks, and with them, the expectations that were never yours. This return doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small gestures, saying what you really think, admitting what you feel, respecting your own rhythm. Authenticity, contrary to popular belief, is not rebellion, it's coherence. It's when what you do finally aligns with what you believe. And it's curious to see how life begins to transform when this happens. Relationships change, opportunities appear, and the world responds with the same truth that you begin to emit. Jung saw this synchronicity as confirmation that the soul has returned to occupy the center of existence. But being authentic comes at a price: conscious solitude. In a world that rewards those who feign stability, those who choose truth become an uncomfortable mirror. Authenticity reveals false bonds, exposes disguises, and dismantles fragile structures. And that's why many give up on it. But Jung believed that solitude is the cradle of authenticity because it is in silence that the self speaks loudest. When you allow yourself to be who you are without seeking approval, you begin to attract people and experiences aligned with your truth. It's as if the universe were saying, now that you've stopped pretending, I can give you what is real. Being authentic is an act of faith. Faith in yourself, faith in life, faith in the invisible purpose that guides the process. And the more you honor this commitment, the lighter the path becomes, because there is no greater weight than sustaining a version that is not yours. Living authentically is also an exercise in self-love. It's treating yourself with the same tenderness a master would have for a student, with patience, but without complacency. It's learning to say no without guilt and yes with presence. It's understanding that spirituality isn't about escaping the world, but about relating to it in a genuine way. When you are authentic, even mistakes become learning experiences, and even silence gains meaning. Authenticity doesn't distance you from people. It only distances those who don't vibrate at the same frequency, and in return, it brings you closer to those who see who you truly are. Jung said that nothing is more contagious than a soul at peace with itself. And it is this silent peace that marks the return to the self, the feeling of finally being home, even within one's own body. But this return is not the end. It's the prelude to something even deeper, the awakening of wholeness. There is a silent moment when the search ceases, not because the questions have ended, but because you have finally become the answer. Carl Jung called this moment the awakening of the self, the point at which the soul stops begging for meaning and begins to radiate it. There are no fireworks, no theatrical epiphanies. There is peace, a serenity that no longer depends on external circumstances. It is when you realize that what you sought in people, in achievements and in promises was always within you, waiting to be remembered. This awakening is not the end of the journey. It is its true beginning, because it is here that the ego kneels before the mystery of life and for the first time understands that control was never power. It was fear. The self awakens when fear loses its function, when self-love takes the place of self-criticism, and when authenticity becomes the natural way of existing. Awakening is not an escape from reality, but a reconciliation with it. It is looking at chaos and still seeing purpose. It is understanding that the shadow is not the enemy, that pain is not punishment, and that even suffering has a place in the harmony of the whole. Jung said that whoever looks outside dreams, but whoever looks inside awakens. This phrase summarizes the essence of the spiritual process, exchanging the illusion of perfection for the fullness of truth. The self does not seek to eliminate the ego. It invites it to serve the soul, and it is in this balance that true spirituality is born, that which does not promise salvation, but presence. The awakening of the self is the moment when the human being perceives themselves as part of the divine, and the divine manifests itself through the human. There is no separation between one and the other, only forgetting. And awakening is remembering. After this memory occurs, nothing is ever the same again. Colors seem more vivid, time dilates, and even silence takes on a different texture. You no longer need to prove your worth because you recognize it. You no longer seek love because you feel it flowing from within. And perhaps for the first time, you understand that life isn't about becoming a better person. It's about returning to who you always were. The self doesn't awaken like thunder, but like the sunrise, slow, inevitable, and transformative. When you arrive here, you understand that all pain was preparation, all loss was refinement, and every encounter was a mirror. The soul, finally, remembers the way home. And it is from this place of stillness and lucidity that true power is born, the power to simply be. Ultimately, it all comes down to a choice. Continue trying to be what others expect of you, or finally be who you are. Carl Jung said that the soul becomes ill when the ego lives to please the world, and that's exactly what emotional healing means, the moment you stop searching outside for what has always existed within. Healing is not a mystical event, it's a process of courage, the courage to listen to yourself, to prioritize yourself, to respect yourself. Self-love is not a spiritual luxury, it's a biological need of the soul. Because without it, all giving becomes exhaustion, and all kindness becomes imprisonment. So take a deep breath, look inside. Ask yourself honestly, in which areas of your life are you still neglecting yourself? What parts of yourself are waiting for you to say, now it's my turn? What would happen if you started today to treat yourself as someone worthy of the love you so generously offer to others? The answer isn't in the future. It begins with the next gesture, the next no, the next minute you decide to choose yourself. Life won't change by chance. It changes when you shift your focus from the world to your soul. If this video touched something within you, write in the comments what you're ready to let go of. Share this message with someone who constantly pushes themselves to the limit. It might be the reminder they need to rediscover themselves. And if you want to continue immersing yourself in this process of healing and self-discovery, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Together, we will continue the journey that Jung began, the journey of returning home, the path back to the self.